Chapter 2 of The Sea, the Road and a Restless Heart. I bought my first car, a little Mini. It was an R-Reg and had one previous lady owner. A mighty 998cc, finished in a very dubious sand glow, the colour of a full nappy. But it was 3 years old, reliable for its day, and most importantly, cheap to insure. And insurance in those days, as it is now, was brutal for young lads, and the Mini's low grouping made it just about possible to afford it. It set a pattern: spend as much as I could afford to buy the car I wanted, and then keep it running on a shoestring. Rust spots needed constant sanding and touching up in those days, and damp mornings often meant pleading with a choke, WD-40 and the contacts to get it going, and to just nurse that little engine into life. Funds were best saved for nights out and trips to Liverpool, and with careful driving I found I could get from Norfolk to Liverpool on one 5-gallon tank. I cruised pretty well all the way at 60 miles an hour, limiting my use of the brake pedal as much as I possibly could. The Mini's party trick was corners. It clung to the road like it was on rails. Hills were another matter, it was hopeless. My favourite stretch of road was the Buxton to Macclesfield road, often closed in winter by drifting snow. Tight, sweeping, beautiful. I knew the bends by heart, knew where I could see far enough to risk overtaking. To other drivers, it must have looked insane, this tiny little car darting past a line of traffic round what appeared to be a blind corner. To me, it was exhilarating. It was freedom. At 6'5", people joked I should sit in the back seat. In reality, I ripped out the standard seat, bolted on a Recaro on extended rails, and fitted a tiny steering wheel so I could fit my knees into the car. It was crude, but it worked. And I remember taking a friend home one night on the B roads of Norfolk. We hit a crest too fast and went airborne just before a sharp right-hand bend. I had a split second to wonder whether we'd land in time to make the corner or plough straight into a hedge. Luckily we landed and I scrabbled round the corner. My passenger never travelled with me again, strangely. I, perversely, was pleased. My reputation as fearless was growing. I bought the Mini a few weeks before passing my test in Liverpool. Days after the test, I was pulled over by 5 policemen, still on my provisional licence. They were driving a transit van. It had no lights on top and no siren, no nothing. Hence, I didn't know it was the police. We were on a dual carriageway, but in an urban environment. Once they eventually caught me, they informed me I'd been doing 60 in a 30. And I say eventually because back then a transit with 5 policemen on board was not the fastest vehicle in the world. And they admitted they'd struggled to catch me. I was polite, sober, and admitted I'd gone a little bit too fast. They let me off with a warning. It was the first of 21 times I've been pulled over in my life, and the first of many let-offs. It was a good lesson in politeness and honesty. Get you quite a long way. In Liverpool, I used to race with my mates to the Egbert Arms, which was our local. The trick was to jump the lights, setting off as soon as the opposite lights turned to amber. That cancelled out the Mini's lack of power. Most of my friends drove Cortinas, Capris or old MGBs, hopeless in corners. Against bikes, mind you, I lost every time in the dry, but in the wet, the Mini could have them. At first I hated Liverpool. Boarded up houses, rough locals, a city centre in ruins. But slowly, I grew to love it and love the people once you understood them. I remember nights in the cabin club with nurses, police, ballet dancers and us Navy lads. Cash was tight, so we mind-swept half-finished drinks from abandoned tables. My kids laugh now, it'd be suicidal with today's risks. But back then, it's just what you did. I was there during the Toxteth riots of 81. It was a difficult time in the UK. Britain was shrinking, industries dying, as our empire disappeared, and with it, all the jobs. We had 25% youth unemployment, and the anger spilled onto the streets. Punk was the soundtrack, raw, furious, brilliant. And so after 3 weeks in Liverpool, I went to my first ship, the MV Pegu. One, if not the oldest in the fleet, small and devoid of any modern technology. At the time, I didn't realise how lucky I was. In fact, I was deeply disappointed. I was thinking I got the worst gig in the company. Navigation was still done by sextant, for real. Every morning, we all lined up on the bridge wing, captain, deck officers, and us cadets, to shoot the sun and then race to finish our calculations. If you were good, you could get our position to within 1.5 miles. I loved it. I loved the competition, the ritual, the precision. The Pegu also carried old Union purchased derricks. Tricky to master, dangerous, and only 2.5 tons safe working load. They took skill to master. I remember 3 of us middies out practicing with them on Christmas 1979. I whizzed around the tween decks in between that on a tiny gas-powered forklift. No safety rails, no harnesses, no health and safety. It was another world. And it was on the Pegu that I saw my first death at sea. A polypropylene mooring line snapped, whipping across the deck like a monstrous elastic band, a 5-inch diameter elastic band. It caught a crew boy in the stomach and killed him instantly. He wasn't really a boy, more an old man. We picked them up in Freetown to help with maintenance on the African coast, and they were called crew boys. He was gone in a heartbeat. I'll never forget it. As the Pegu rolled south into the Bay of Biscay en route to Africa, I ran into my first proper storm. Just force 10, occasional force 11. And we were hove to for 3 days with the bow pointing into the weather. The waves were crashing into us. Everything was soaked. It was cold. It was miserable. But eventually we broke free into the warmth of Africa. Banjul was my first port. The heat pressed down, the quayside alive with shouting, the streets dusty and raw. There was something, you could feel it tangible in the air. We spent Christmas in Abidjan, sweating under a tropical sun whilst we practiced with the derricks. Sierra Leone, I remember this young girl on the beach, and we had a day's leave and we were on this beach, and this girl sold us a pineapple, and she came up to us with a machete about 18 inches long, giant machete, holding the pineapple in the palm of her hand, and with 4 quick strokes handed us the pineapple. Stunning. Like Africa, beautiful, dangerous, unforgettable. The beaches themselves, just miles and miles of white, empty sand, tropical palms, with huge Atlantic rollers crashing into the simmering heat of the shore. Takoradi in Ghana echoed with the decay of empire. It was actually only about 20 years since the British had disappeared. The quay was covered in cockroaches, as big as mice. Rats, like small dogs, scuttled along. We braved them, of course, for a run ashore. And eventually, after looking for ages, we found an open bar stroke restaurant. It was empty. But as we chose from the menu, the waiter kept saying the dish was off. Eventually, we asked, "What do you have?" It turns out that the only thing available was pineapple fritters, as per the menu. We all eventually tucked into our fritters until a giant spider, the size of my quite large hand, crawled down the wall behind my head, at which point we all bolted. Africa was vivid, frightening, and at the same time exciting. It was full of noise, of danger and of wonder. It cracked open my small Norfolk world and it showed me life in its rawest form. Months later, on my next trip, on the Memnon, we joined that ship in Singapore. It was a dream trip. We had 3 days to acclimatise. 3 wondrous days in Singapore, doing nothing, just exploring. Saw my first ladyboy there. It was an interesting experience on Boogie Street. And we went all the way around the world, right away from Singapore back to Singapore, east and west coast of the States. So when I was in Seattle, I'd returned to the ship, forgotten my wallet, and walked alone through the backstreets to meet my friends at the Space Needle. And there, as I walked along, something struck me with the force of a revelation. Something that's incredibly rare, and it was such a gift that it came to me. And I realised I was born lucky, incredibly lucky. Born tall, healthy, English, and to good parents. Given wit, confidence, and most of all, a belief that I could do or be anything I chose. Others I'd already seen in Africa, in dockyards, just growing up. They were not so lucky. They had most of those things, if not all of them, but they didn't realise it. And at just 16, I realised life had dealt me a winning hand. The Space Needle loomed ahead, but what filled me was something bigger, a certainty that my words and thoughts could shape my life. That belief became my foundation. It carried me through storms, through failures, even years later when I was crushed by over $500,000 in debt. It began on that walk in Seattle, a boy seeing clearly for the first time the extraordinary gift of his own life. Back in Norfolk, another mentor shaped me, Peter Bensley. Peter had left school at 14. In his own words, barely literate, but he built a butchery empire of 16 shops, supplying the Queen and all the schools in Norfolk. He was extraordinary, tough, blunt, and brilliantly funny. I remember one story he told me about bumping into an old schoolmate, and the man sneered at his success. "Oh, you're lucky, Peter. It's easy for you, fancy house, fancy car, big boat, etc." Peter shot back, "Easy? Lucky? While you were pissing it up every night in the pub, I was on the marshes every morning at 5 o'clock looking after my cattle. Twice a week I worked through the night doing my accounts, 7 days a week, every week. What built this business was hard work, graft. Peter lived it. Work nearly killed him. 2 heart attacks well before he was 40. Stress from the taxman chasing him. Endless hours running the shops. But he carried on, stubborn and relentless. Julia, my sister, and I grew up with Peter's daughters, Tracy and Alison. We holidayed together on his boat. Tracy was my first crush, though I never admitted it at the time. In Dusseldorf, the 3 of us sneaked ashore to a beer festival, drank too much schnapps, and got hopelessly lost. We stumbled back at midnight to find police lights flashing on the quay and frantic parents waiting. In fact, my mum was not frantic. She said, "It's all right, they're with Mark, they'll be fine." Peter was fine, but Helen was beside herself. She was a worrier. We were grounded. But I remember Peter afterwards, calm, steady, not scolding. He told me simply, if you want to be a man, take responsibility for those in your care. That stuck. More than any lecture, more than any punishment. Peter showed me that success is no accident. It's work, sacrifice and responsibility. His lessons echoed through every company I ever built. Chapter 2, Life Lessons. Freedom starts small. Even a rusty Mini can open the world if you're determined enough. Fearlessness builds confidence, but it must be balanced with respect for risk. The sea is a hard teacher. Storms, poverty, and sudden death strip life to its essence. Gratitude is the foundation. That walk to the Space Needle lit the belief I could shape my life. Luck is not graft in disguise. Peter's story proved that discipline, grit, hard work, not chance, make your future. I would add, from later lessons in life, belief, perseverance, expectation, passion. Those are the ingredients. Thanks for listening.